Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sarah Newman, and I'm excited to bring you the 13th episode of Mixed Media, The Paper Wishes Way. Today, we're going to combine texture paste with embossing powders. Now, you might not think this would work, but it's a great way to get a raised dimensional look with some color and some sparkle. So we're using Ranger's opaque texture paste plus embossing powders from Stampendous. Now, I'm also going to be using stencils from our friends at Lavinia, and they have such beautiful, versatile designs that work really nicely with this technique. And I'm going to show you 5 of them today. So we'll play with foliage. We also have berry. We have flourish. There's ivy. And the last one for today is called buds. And when we get into the demonstration, I'm also going to show you one of my must-have stenciling tools, and we'll talk about why this little Stencil Pal is so great to have for this technique. I've got 3 projects to share with you, and these cards will use papers from the Lilac Mini Collection from 49 in Market. Now, the name is a little bit misleading because it's not really mini in any way. The pack is 12 inch by 12 inch, and you're going to have 4 double-sided papers. These will all be 12 by 12. You can see the designs here. Plus, you'll also have 2 sheets of laser die cuts, and you can see these designs here. This collection is absolutely stunning. It's so beautiful, and I think you will just fall in love with the colors and the pre-collaged backgrounds as well. So as you can see, we have a lot to explore today, and I'm really glad you're joining us. So come play with us. Let's jump right into the demo. First, I'm going to be working onto my craft mat. Now, this is really the best way to protect your work surface from not only the texture paste, but also the heat from the heat tool that we'll use later. So I'm going to move aside a couple of things here and get my cardstock taped in place. The stencil that I'm going to be using is the foliage design, which is one I really love. So I've got a piece of black cardstock, just regular weight cardstock, and I'm going to tack down my stencil in place. And I'm using black because I think it's a little bit easier for you to see when that white texture paste goes on. Now I'm going to use a little bit of this hunky-dory low tack tape. This is going to secure my stencil in place so that it doesn't slide everywhere. So I'm going to tack this down on all 4 sides and just secure that right onto my craft mat so that nothing moves while I'm doing my stenciling. Okay, so one more piece, we'll pop that down here. Okay, now a couple of things that I'm going to have on hand. First of all, I've got my texture paste. I also have a palette knife. Now the palette knife is what I'm going to use to get the texture paste out of the jar, and I'm going to apply it at one end of my stencil. If you don't have a palette knife, you can also use just a plastic butter knife. You can also use your finger if you want to. So I'm going to have these on hand. I'm also going to have on hand one of my favorite tools. This is the Stencil Pal. And I'm going to tell you a little confession. I will admit the first time I saw this, I thought, I don't really need this. But I gave it a try, and I have to say that for smoothing out your texture paste onto your stencil, it really does work beautifully. So in the past, when I'm smoothing out my texture paste, I've tried like using the edge of my palette knife, which kind of works. I've also used like an old hotel key card, but I really found that the Stencil Pal, which is flexible and also nice and big, will give just a better overall effect. And you can see that this is 5.5 inches, which is going to give you more coverage than my old hotel key card. So this is a must-have, I find, when you're using any kind of texture medium, anytime you want it to be really smoothly applied. Okay, so let me open up my jar here. And again, I'm just going to scoop out some of the texture paste and apply it at one end. And I can be pretty generous with this because everything extra is going to go back into the jar. So I don't need to worry about wasting anything. Okay, I'll scoop out a little bit more here. And then what I want to do, of course, is make sure to clean off all of my tools when I'm done and put the lid back onto your texture paste. So then I'm just going to take my Stencil Pal. I'm going to be working with this long straight edge, not the curved edge, and I'm just going to drag this along. So this is going to give me that nice smooth effect. And any excess that I have on here, I can just scrape that right off and pop some more down on here. If I need to add more texture paste, I can do that. So you can see the nice smooth effect that we're getting here. And I think I want a little bit more of that texture paste. So again, I'll just scoop some out, maybe go from the other side here and smooth this out on one end. And then just come back this way. So you can see how beautifully smooth this is. Nice, even coverage. Okay. So there we go. Got most of this on here. And now I'm just going to remove my low tack tape. Comes off nice and easy, which is also good. You're not going to be struggling with really sticky tape. I'll pull this off here, and I'm holding down the stencil as I go, just so that I don't pull and yank anything that I don't want to. I'm going to hold this down. Good thing I'm working onto my craft sheet. Okay, I've got all of those pieces off, and now what I'm going to do is gently lift off my stencil. Okay, gently, gently. There we go. So now you can see this beautiful design and that gorgeous white opaque texture paste. Looks really beautiful on black cardstock. So I could leave this as is, but I want to add some color. So I'm going to use some embossing powder, and I'm going to demonstrate with this nice shiny gold tinsel embossing powder. So let me just quickly clean off a little bit of this excess from my craft mat. And I'm going to bring in a piece of folded scrap paper. Okay, I'm just going to open this up because we're doing embossing, so we need to have something that will catch our excess embossing powder. So I'm going to pop this right down here in the middle and grab my embossing powder. Now, I am going to apply this in the exact same way I would if this was embossing ink. So again, you can be pretty generous with the application because any excess is going to go, of course, right back into that jar. Okay, so here we go. And you can see how pretty that is. I'm going to come back on the other side. And again, there we go. So now I've got a really beautiful sparkly effect. What I would do is definitely go in and tap off a little bit of excess here and just make sure that I've got all of the areas covered. And then here's the tricky part. You need to wait. So while you can get your heat tool and start embossing right away, don't really recommend it. And the reason for that is because you've got wet texture paste and you've got your embossing powder on here. If you hit this immediately with your heat tool, you're going to find that the texture paste will start to bubble. And that's going to give you a really uneven effect eventually. And it's also going to take a really, really long time for you to actually melt that embossing powder because you've got wet texture paste in there. So how long do you need to let it dry? Well, it kind of depends on where you live. I'm here in Hamburg, Germany, where it's not necessarily very hot or humid. So I leave it about an hour. So depending on where you are, you may need to leave it a little bit longer. Sometimes I do a batch in the evening and then come back the next day and they're ready to go. So I do have one that is already dry. So I'm going to move aside this one here and bring in the one that I've got that I did the other night. So this is dry and ready to heat set. So again, working onto my craft sheet, I'm going to bring in my heat tool and heat set this. So bear with me for a little bit while I melt this embossing powder. Okay, so my piece has been heat set. All of my embossing powder has melted, and I have this beautiful raised, shiny, dimensional piece. Absolutely gorgeous. Now it is still a little bit hot from that heat tool, so I'm going to let this sit on my craft mat until it cools down. And then you'll notice that it's a bit curved, so I'm just going to set this under a stack of books or something heavy, and that will flatten it out over time. So now I've got a piece that is almost ready to use as a background or embellishment on my card. Absolutely beautiful and so easy to do. Let's take a look at a card project that shows how you can put these elements to use. And you can see here this texture embossing that I've got going on behind this laser window cutout. Now, all of the accents you see here are from the Lilac collection. So the flowers and the printed sentiment and this window as well. The stencil I used is the Flourish design, and I've used that with clear bark embossing powder. Now this powder gives a glossy effect that's different than our sparkly gold tinsel. So it's going to have a less metallic and high shine look, but I love it in combination with these pattern papers. Now I inked around the outside edge of the various pieces of cardstock using roasted coffee ink, and that just adds a little bit more dimension and definition on here. And then just a simple dazzle border and a little bit of green ribbon on there. Now for the card inside, I have more of that beautiful collage pattern paper, plus a couple more laser cutouts, and I've got a dazzle sentiment and another border down here at the bottom. Again, a bit more of my inking on either side here. Okay, let's take a look at a second card. Now this one is using the Ivy stencil and embossing with copper tinsel. So this is the embossing powder that we're using here. Now you'll notice that I've done just a portion of the stencil, and this is an easy technique and a great way to get a different look from any of your stencils. So let me show you a trick for that. Okay, I'm going to set aside my card and bring in a stencil. So the stencil I'm going to demo with is the berry design, which I really like. And I'll work onto a piece of kind of yellow cardstock here. So again, you can see some definition. Now I've got some pieces of torn scrap paper, and that's what I'm going to use to create a bit of a pattern. But of course, I need to use my tape and tack things down so that I don't have sliding stencils on my craft sheet. I'm going to tack this down top and bottom. And then I'm going to take this torn copy paper and I'm just going to position it down here. Got another piece over here. And this is going to give me an open area of my stencil, but instead of having a harsh straight edge, I'm going to have a little bit of textured edge on there. And again, just using my good old low tack tape, I'm going to pop this down to secure things in place. So maybe a little bit more here, up here at the top. Okay, and once again, I'm going to get out my texture paste. I've got my palette knife on hand and scoop some of this out and then just apply this up here at the top as we saw before. I'm going to scoop this out and just get it onto the top area of my stencil. And then, of course, grab my Stencil Pal and drag this along. I've got some extra here. You can scrape off and kind of pat that on. And again, just drag this out. Because this is flexible, I can sort of bend it a little bit as we go. Okay, I think just a little bit more here along the edges. And there we are. Okay, nice and smooth. Now, pop my lid back on my jar here and gently pull this off. can kind of lift this whole piece off here. And then you can see where I've got my texture paste just in that open area. Okay, bear with me as I remove the tape. And very often I'll just set a piece like this to one side because I'm pretty sure I can use that again. Okay, and then lift this off very gently. And there we go. So now I have a portion stenciled on here. So let me once again mop up some of this excess texture paste on here. I'm going to grab another piece of scrap paper. And then let's take our copper, beautiful copper color embossing powder, and I'm just going to tap this on. And there we go. So I have a really beautiful design in just a portion. So again, think about your various stencils that you may have on hand and ways that you can use that torn paper effect to create a completely different look. Okay, so I'm going to very carefully move these things aside. I'll use my folded paper to kind of funnel my embossing powder back into the jar. I'm going to set that aside, and let's take another look at our card project here so that we can see how this has been used. Now, instead of doing my embossing and my texture paste embossing onto solid cardstock, I used cardstock from the lilac set. So you can see I've done it right onto this pattern paper here. Now, again, I'm using elements from the lilac collection. I've got the clock and the flower. The flower is done up on foam tape for a little bit of dimension. And this time the sentiment isn't printed on. This is a dazzle that's put up onto one of the tags from the collection. On the inside, you can see more of a collage grouping with another dazzle sentiment and quickly and easily put together. Okay, I have one more card project to show you, and you'll notice that this one will have a bit of an ombre effect. And so we're going to take a look at how to create that look as well. For this card project, I used the berry stencil and the silver tinsel embossing powder to create an ombre effect. And you can see this here. It has been done onto a piece of the cardstock from the lilac collection. So I'm getting some color and some faux texture in here as well. So you'll see the ombre look is darker down here at the bottom, very heavily opaque silver, getting lighter, 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 all the way up to the top of the card here where you can still see the stenciling, but there's a lot less of that silver embossing powder on there. So it really creates a beautiful variegated effect. It's a super easy technique to do. So let's take a look. I'm going to set aside my card and I'm going to bring in a piece of that lilac cardstock where I have done some stenciling, and I've used the Bud stencil for this one. So I'm going to once again bring in a piece of copier paper and just set that in here. Now I've got my silver tinsel embossing powder, and the first thing I need to do is decide which area I want to have be more heavily stenciled and embossed, and which area I want a lighter touch. So I'm going to say the darker area is going to be down here. So I'm going to start over at this side. And to do this, I find it really helps to decant some of the embossing powder into the lid. It's just a little easier to grab some of that. And then what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of it and kind of sprinkle it on here. Just sort of rub it between my palms so I'm able to get a very, very light application. Okay, I'm going to tap off the excess and do just a little bit more. Okay, so I've got some on here, tap off the excess, and I think you can see where that is starting to stick. Okay, now I can do a little bit heavier application in the middle. And just continuing along here. all the way until I get down toward the bottom where I know I want to have darker coverage. Okay, and then I'll tap off the excess, and you can see where I've got darker areas here and lighter areas up here. I'll tap it going the other way. Now if I've got some areas where I want to add a little bit more, I can do that. I can really sprinkle it on at the bottom, make sure that I get some nice coverage there. And then again, just kind of working this in here if there are any patches that I want to add more to. Okay. And there you can start to see I've got a really nice ombre look. And this part does take a little bit of time. And of course, you can always go back and add some more, but you can see where things are getting progressively darker. You want to do this with a bit of a light touch because you can always add more, but it's a bit tricky to take it off. Okay. And there you can see. So it's darker here, gradually getting lighter all the way to the end where when this melts, it's going to give me some shine and some definition around these areas, but it's not going to be as dark as it is down toward the bottom. I just have to add a little bit more. I see some uneven areas here. Okay, just gradually tapping that on. And then again, what you'll need to do is let this dry. Then generally what I like to do is just go along some of these detail areas and make sure that I've got rid of any little stray bits of embossing powder that may be in these open areas. And for that, I like to use a very fine tip dry paintbrush, and you can just go in and kind of shimmy away any of those little bits in there. So that's how you can create a really pretty ombre effect. What I'm going to do is move aside my piece of folded paper here and my embossing powder. And I want to show you another example of one that I did using the same stencil, and again using a larger area of this. And this is of course with the gold embossing powder and also done onto a piece of cardstock from the Lilac collection. So you can see that you can get a really cool effect with this ombre look. Let me bring back in the card. We can take another look at this. And you can see, again, using that silver tinsel and the berry stencil. We also have some butterflies and, again, some dazzles here on the front of the card. On the inside, I have a couple more elements from the Lilac collection, this frame and the dragonfly, and again, some more dazzles. Okay, so with this last card, I think we've seen just how easy it is to use texture paste with embossing powder and with our stencils. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for being a part of the Paper Wishes family. We're really glad you're here with us. I can't wait to see what you create, so do drop us a line. Be sure and leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately, and you can see them below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see this webisode on paperwishes.com.